They say weddings bring families closer together, but for 72-year-old Charlotte Fitzgerald, her son's wedding did the opposite. It exposed a painful truth she never wanted to believe. Imagine spending months pouring your heart into cooking, decorating, and saving money to make your son's big day perfect, only to overhear that you weren't even considered a guest, but the hired help. That's exactly what Charlotte discovered when she accidentally heard her future daughter-in-law laughing about her being the perfect free babysitter for 15 kids during the wedding. No invitation to dance, no seat at the table, just a job. But Charlotte wasn't a pushover. What happened next turned what was meant to be a joyous family celebration into a story that went viral worldwide. A story about respect, dignity, and a grandmother's long overdue stand for herself. Because sometimes, the quietest people are the ones who can teach the loudest lessons. For months, Charlotte Fitzgerald had been living in a whirl of joyful anticipation. At 72, she moved through her small kitchen with the steady grace of someone who'd spent her entire life cooking for family gatherings. Pots simmered on the stove, lists covered her counter, and a soft tune from her favorite radio station filled the background as she planned every detail of her son, Marcus's upcoming wedding. This wasn't just a celebration to her. It was redemption, renewal, and proof that love could bloom again, even after heartbreak. Marcus had lost his first wife years ago, and when he met Tiffany, a charming young woman who seemed to light up every room, Charlotte's heart swelled with happiness. She saw in Tiffany a second daughter, the one she'd never had. So when Marcus mentioned they were short on funds for catering, Charlotte instantly volunteered. "I'll take care of the buffet," she said, smiling. "Let me make it special. My gift to you both." She meant every word. Cooking had always been her love language. Over decades, her kitchen had witnessed birthdays, anniversaries, and late-night heart-to-hearts. And now it would help create her son's new beginning. Charlotte threw herself into the preparations with tireless enthusiasm. She spent her evenings comparing ingredient prices, designing centerpieces, and sketching floral arrangements on scrap paper. She called local farmers to reserve the freshest produce and made lists upon lists, everything from marinades to desserts to napkin colors. The total cost would run her nearly $3,000. But she didn't mind. What's money, she thought, compared to the joy of watching your only son find happiness again? Her friends from church called her crazy for taking on so much work at her age. But Charlotte brushed it off. "It's not work if it's done with love," she'd say, waving her hand dismissively. Every morning, she imagined how Tiffany would beam with gratitude when she saw the tables lined with roasted meats, colorful salads, and pies baked from recipes passed down through generations. She even practiced her speech for the reception, something short and heartfelt about love, family, and second chances. Charlotte pictured herself sitting near the front with the other family members, wearing her coral-colored dress, watching Marcus dance with his bride as everyone celebrated the start of a new chapter. For her, this wedding wasn't just an event. It was the culmination of a mother's devotion. Still, behind the sweet excitement, there lingered a quiet ache Charlotte rarely allowed herself to feel. Being a widow for nearly 2 decades had taught her the value of independence, but also the loneliness that came with it. Since her husband's passing, she'd poured her energy into being there for her son, helping him raise his children, supporting his career, and never once asking for anything in return. That was just who she was. Family came first, always. But as she moved around her kitchen that Tuesday afternoon, making her final shopping list, she couldn't shake a subtle weariness that came with age. Her hands, still deft but slower, trembled slightly as she wrote the last few numbers. Outside, she could hear Tiffany's laughter echoing through the patio. Her soon-to-be daughter-in-law had come over with her sister, Audrey, to go over wedding details. Their laughter sounded light-hearted and warm, comforting even, and Charlotte smiled to herself. "Such lovely girls," she whispered, wiping her hands on her apron. It filled her with pride to know her home was full of life again. She took a sip of her tea, humming softly, completely unaware that in a few short minutes, that same laughter would shatter her illusions and change everything she thought she knew about her family. If someone had told Charlotte that the most painful betrayal could come dressed in sweetness, she would have laughed it off. Yet in that quiet moment, with sunlight pouring through lace curtains, fate decided to lift the veil. While measuring flour for a batch of wedding cookies, she heard Tiffany's voice drift in from the patio, her tone casual but edged with something Charlotte couldn't quite name. "Don't worry, Audrey," Tiffany was saying. "Everything's under control for the kids at the wedding. Marcus's mum will handle them the whole night." Charlotte froze mid-stir. Handle them? What did that mean? She turned down the radio, leaning closer to the open kitchen window. Her heart beat suddenly loud in her ears. And then came the laughter, carefree, sharp, almost mocking. "It's perfect," Audrey giggled. "The old lady will watch the screaming brats while we dance and drink." "Genius!" Charlotte's stomach twisted. The words kept coming, each one slicing deeper. Tiffany calling her useful, saying she wouldn't even realize she's being used, bragging about how convenient it was to have a free nanny. The flour slipped from Charlotte's hand, dusting the counter like snow. In that instant, the warm kitchen, the smell of cookies, the gentle hum of her plans, all of it faded, standing there, hidden behind her curtain. Charlotte felt something inside her shift. Not rage, not even sorrow, just a quiet, devastating clarity. For 72 years, she had lived believing that love and sacrifice were the same thing. That day, for the first time, she began to understand they weren't. Charlotte stood frozen, her hands still dusted with flour. As the conversation outside continued to slice through the air like a cold wind, every sentence felt like a new betrayal. Tiffany's sweet, melodic voice, the same one that used to call her Miss Charlotte with respect and affection, had turned sharp, almost mocking. "It's brilliant, really," Tiffany said. "Marcus's mum loves kids. She'll keep them entertained all night, and she's too polite to complain. We won't have to pay for a babysitter, and she'll feel useful." Audrey's laughter chimed in like nails on glass. "So she's basically your free employee. That's hilarious." Tiffany chuckled softly. "Exactly. And it keeps her busy so she doesn't butt into adult conversations. You know how older women are. Always wanting to give advice or tell stories no one asked for." Charlotte's chest tightened. Her son, her Marcus, wouldn't have gone along with this, would he? But as she leaned closer, heart pounding, she heard Tiffany say, "Marcus doesn't even realize it. He thinks she volunteered out of love. Men can be so naive." Charlotte pressed a trembling hand against the counter to steady herself. For a moment, she thought she might faint. The words felt unreal, impossible even. Yet there they were, floating in from the patio like poison wrapped in laughter. Her son, the boy she'd carried, fed, and defended for decades, had apparently agreed to let his mother spend his wedding running after strangers' children like some unpaid nanny. A wave of humiliation washed over her. 72 years of being the strong one, the caretaker, the comforter, the dependable matriarch. And now she was being talked about as if she were a burden, disguised as a convenience. At least she'll be useful for once. Audrey laughed. And since she's cooking the food too, there'll be more for the important guests. They both burst into laughter. Charlotte's hand shot up to her mouth to stop a cry from escaping. She could hardly breathe. It was like standing outside her own life, watching her love and loyalty being reduced to punchlines. Her heart pounded in her ears. For years, she had imagined gaining a daughter through Tiffany, someone who'd love Marcus and treat her with kindness. Instead, she'd welcomed a snake into her garden. For several long minutes after the conversation ended, Charlotte stood by the window, unable to move. The laughter faded, replaced by the sound of her son's footsteps and his affectionate voice. "What are my beautiful ladies laughing about?" Marcus asked. "Oh, nothing," Tiffany replied quickly, switching back to her soft, sugary tone. "Just talking about the wedding plans. Everything's going to be perfect." Perfect. The word echoed in Charlotte's mind like a cruel joke. She wiped her eyes with the edge of her apron, forcing her breathing to slow. She couldn't confront them. Not yet. Not when her son was this blind, this trusting. Marcus adored Tiffany, and Charlotte couldn't bear to see that love, poisoned by confrontation. Instead, she swallowed her heartbreak and began moving mechanically through the motions. Washing her hands, covering the dough, pretending the world hadn't just tilted, but something deep inside her had changed. It wasn't just pain now, it was resolve. Quiet, steady, deliberate resolve. Charlotte Fitzgerald might have been 72, but she wasn't weak, and she wasn't going to let anyone, not even her own son, turn her into a servant. That night, long after Tiffany and Marcus had left, Charlotte sat in her dimly lit living room, staring at the family photographs that lined her mantelpiece. Marcus's first day of school, his college graduation, his late father's proud smile beside them both. She remembered the nights she'd stayed up sewing Halloween costumes, baking birthday cakes, and comforting him when he lost his wife. She had given everything for this family, and yet, somehow, she had raised a man who could stand by while his fiancée mocked the very hands that fed him. "Where did I go wrong?" she whispered to the empty room. But even as tears welled in her eyes, another thought rose above the grief, clear and sharp. Maybe this wasn't just about what they did to her. Maybe this was her moment to remind them who she really was. Not a pushover. Not an old lady to be used and discarded, but a woman with dignity, intelligence, and, if necessary, a taste for poetic justice. As the clock ticked past midnight, Charlotte made herself a cup of chamomile tea and began thinking, carefully, strategically, about how to teach her family a lesson they would never forget. Charlotte didn't sleep that night. The shadows on her bedroom wall seemed to shift with every thought that crossed her mind. She replayed the conversation over and over, as though searching for a different meaning, a misunderstanding, something to soften the blow. But there was no mistaking what she'd heard. They hadn't just planned to use her. They had laughed about it, mocked her kindness, twisted her love into something cheap and convenient. Every time Tiffany's words echoed in her head, "She won't even realize we're using her." Her heart squeezed tighter. By dawn, her pillow was damp with tears. She hadn't even realized she'd cried. She rose slowly, her bones aching, her heart heavier than ever before. The morning light streamed through the curtains, painting her room in soft gold, but nothing about the day felt warm anymore. As she dressed and went downstairs, her home, once filled with excitement, now felt foreign. The decorations she'd been working on lay half-finished on the table, surrounded by ribbons, flowers, and lists. They looked less like symbols of love, and more like props in a play she no longer wanted to perform. When Marcus called that afternoon, his voice was cheerful, oblivious. "Hey, Mom! Tiffany says you're almost done with the buffet prep. You really are the best. We couldn't do this without you." Charlotte forced a smile that he couldn't see through the phone. "Of course, dear. Everything's going smoothly." It was instinct. The reflex of a mother who'd spent a lifetime putting her child's comfort before her own. She asked about his day, about the final fittings, about how he and Tiffany were holding up with the stress of the big event. Not once did she let her voice crack. When the call ended, she placed the phone on the counter and just stood there, staring at it. Her reflection in the glass window caught her eye. The lines on her face, the grey streaks in her hair, the quiet strength in her posture. For the first time in her life, she saw not just a mother, but a woman who had been taken for granted for far too long. She realized something profound. Being selfless was beautiful, but being invisible was not. For the next few days, Charlotte carried on as if nothing had happened. To anyone watching, she was still the doting mother of the groom, joyfully preparing every last detail. But inside, she was watching, learning. She noticed how Tiffany always phrased her requests as expectations. "Miss Charlotte, make sure there are enough kid-friendly snacks, okay?" Or, "Don't forget to bring extra napkins for the little ones." Not please, not thank you. Just orders disguised as politeness. Marcus, sweet but naive, went along with it all, assuming his mother's generosity was endless. Every smile Tiffany gave him, every gentle pat on his arm, was a reminder of how easily charm could hide manipulation. Charlotte didn't lash out. She didn't confront. Instead, she began to plan. Quietly, calmly, like a woman who'd spent a lifetime solving problems without ever being credited for it. She spoke with her old friend Loretta, the one person she trusted with her entire heart. When Charlotte told her everything, Loretta's outrage was immediate. "That girl's got no shame," she snapped. "You've done enough, Char. Let them see what life looks like when you're not there to clean up their mess." Charlotte smiled faintly through her tears. "That's exactly what I intend to do." That evening, as the sun dipped low and bathed her living room in orange light, Charlotte sat at her desk and began to write in her neat cursive handwriting. It wasn't a letter yet, more of a reflection. She wrote about love, respect, and how easily the two could be confused. She wrote about the difference between helping and being used. Each word brought her closer to peace, to clarity. By the time she finished, she knew exactly what she needed to do. She wasn't going to scream. She wasn't going to make a scene or seek revenge through cruelty. Her lesson would be silent, dignified, and unforgettable. They wanted her to work for free. Fine. She'd give them exactly what they paid for. Nothing. The day of the wedding would arrive. The guests would gather, and they would finally see what happened when the woman they dismissed as the old lady with energy decided she was done. As she turned off the lamp and climbed into bed, Charlotte felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not sadness, not anger, but power. Quiet, graceful power. The kind that doesn't shout. It simply walks away. By Wednesday morning, 3 days after overhearing the conversation that shattered her trust, Charlotte had transformed her pain into purpose. She stood at the kitchen counter with her phone in one hand and a notepad in the other, her expression calm, almost serene. Anyone looking at her might have thought she was simply finalizing catering details, but her mind was sharp, deliberate, and focused. She began making phone calls, not to confirm orders, but to cancel them. Every vendor she'd booked for the buffet, every delivery she'd prepaid, every flower arrangement and centerpiece. All of it was systematically undone. Her tone remained polite but firm. "Good morning. This is Charlotte Fitzgerald. I'm afraid there's been a change of plans." When asked if she wanted to reschedule or postpone, she replied softly, "No, dear, I won't be needing them at all. A few tried to charge cancellation fees, but she didn't care. Paying a small penalty was a small price for peace of mind. By noon, the wedding buffet that she'd spent months planning no longer existed. The same hands that had built every detail with love were now dismantling it with quiet strength. Once the last order was cancelled, Charlotte sat down and allowed herself a deep, steadying breath. The silence in her kitchen felt different now. No longer heavy, but freeing. On the table beside her sat a fresh cup of tea, steaming gently. She thought of Tiffany's laughter that day on the patio. How easily she'd spoken about using her. The memory no longer hurt. It only solidified Charlotte's resolve. This wasn't revenge. Not really. It was a boundary drawn in the most elegant way possible. They wanted her help without respect. Now they'd experience what life looked like without her help at all. Still, Charlotte knew she didn't want to spend the wedding day sitting at home, waiting for phone calls and guilt-ridden apologies. That would make her a spectator to her own act of defiance. No, she needed to live that day, to reclaim the joy that had been stolen from her. So she called her dearest friend Loretta. The moment Loretta picked up and heard her tone, she said, "All right, Char, what did they do this time?" Charlotte chuckled softly. "Oh, Lo, they mistook kindness for servitude. But I'm done being the help." Loretta didn't hesitate. "Say no more. What's the plan?" The two women spent the next hour plotting like schoolgirls. Charlotte told Loretta everything. The cancelled buffet, the fake politeness, the years of being taken for granted. Loretta listened, her voice alternating between outrage and admiration. "You're right," she said. "They need a wake-up call, and you deserve a break." Together, they came up with a plan, so simple and poetic that Charlotte couldn't help but smile for the first time in days. On the morning of the wedding, while the family would be scrambling to set up, Charlotte would be nowhere near the chaos. Instead, she and Loretta would drive 2 hours out of town to a luxury lakeside spa they'd always dreamed of visiting, but had never found the time or courage to indulge in. "You've spent your life feeding everyone else," Loretta said. "It's time someone serves you." The next day, Charlotte booked the spa suite, complete with massages, facials, and breakfast overlooking the water. She used the same money she'd set aside for the wedding buffet. Her hard-earned savings, now repurposed for something that truly mattered, her own dignity. On Friday night, the eve of the wedding, Charlotte wrote a letter, one that would change everything. Her pen moved slowly but deliberately across the paper. "Dear Marcus," she began. "By the time you read this, I'll be enjoying a much-deserved rest. For months, I worked to make your wedding perfect. But I recently discovered that my role was not that of a guest, but of a free nanny for 15 children. A role no one asked me if I wanted." She explained that she had cancelled the buffet and that she hoped they would find a solution. "This isn't out of spite," she wrote, "but out of self-respect. I love you, son, but love should never come at the cost of dignity." She signed it simply, "With love, but with dignity. Mom." The next morning, when Loretta arrived to pick her up, Charlotte was dressed not in her wedding outfit, but in her favorite coral-colored dress. Elegant, bright, and symbolic. Loretta laughed when she saw her. "You look like a woman about to take back her life." Charlotte smiled. "That's exactly what I am." As they drove away from the city, windows down and laughter filling the car, Charlotte felt lighter than she had in years. The wedding might go on without her, but for once, she was finally the guest of honor in her own life. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and golden. A picture-perfect Saturday, the kind photographers dream of. In another world, Charlotte would have been up before sunrise, marinating meats, frosting cakes, and arranging platters. Instead, she woke to the sound of birds outside her window. Her heart calm and light, she took a slow shower, brushed her hair, and slipped into her coral dress. Not the one she had chosen for the wedding, but the one she wore when she wanted to feel radiant. When Loretta's car pulled up at precisely 7, the air hummed with the quiet thrill of rebellion. "Ready?" Loretta grinned, leaning on the horn. Charlotte smiled, locking her front door behind her. "More than ready, Lo." They loaded their bags, waved goodbye to the neighborhood, and set off toward the open road. The farther they drove, the lighter Charlotte felt. Every mile between her and the wedding hall was a mile between her and a lifetime of being taken for granted. She wasn't escaping out of bitterness. She was reclaiming something that had been slowly chipped away for years, her right to peace. 2 hours later, the spa came into view, an elegant haven overlooking a shimmering blue lake. The moment Charlotte stepped out of the car, she could smell lavender and eucalyptus in the air. "Welcome, ladies," the receptionist greeted with a bright smile. "We have your suite ready, and your first treatment begins in 1 hour." A glass of chilled mimosa was placed in her hand, and as she took that first sip, Charlotte almost laughed at the contrast. Somewhere in the city, chaos was brewing, and she was about to get a hot stone massage. As she settled into her plush room, she thought of Marcus and Tiffany. By now, Marcus would be calling her. Realizing she wasn't answering, Tiffany would be pacing, her perfect schedule unraveling, minute by minute. The image made Charlotte smile. Not cruelly, but with quiet satisfaction. She had warned them in her letter. Labor is paid. If they hadn't valued her when she offered her time for free, perhaps they'd learn the hard way how expensive disrespect could be. By 11:30, as Charlotte lay face down on a massage table with warm stones on her back, her phone began to vibrate on the side table. Once, twice, then over and over. 17 missed calls, 8 unread messages. She didn't move a muscle. "Miss Charlotte," the masseuse said softly, noticing her smile. "Everything all right?" Charlotte chuckled faintly. "Perfectly fine, dear. Please continue." Each missed call was a reminder that her absence was being felt deeply. As the afternoon rolled on, she and Loretta sipped white wine on the terrace, gazing out at the lake. "You know what's funny?" Charlotte said, twirling her glass. "I used to think peace was selfish, that it was something you had to earn after taking care of everyone else first. But it turns out, peace is just choosing yourself." Loretta raised her glass in a toast. "To choosing yourself." They clinked glasses as sunlight danced on the water. Meanwhile, back in the city, the wedding hall was descending into beautiful, delicious chaos. Guests had started arriving, expecting the elaborate buffet Charlotte had promised. Tables stood empty. The caterers, long since cancelled, never showed. Tiffany's perfect smile began to crack as she whispered to Marcus, "Where's your mother? And where's the food?" By 3 in the afternoon, Marcus had called everyone he could think of. Neighbors, friends, even Charlotte's church. But no one knew where she was. Finally, he found her letter on the kitchen table. As he read it, the color drained from his face. "With love, but with dignity, Mom." The words hit harder than any argument ever could. When he called again, Charlotte finally answered, her voice calm and warm. "Hi, son. How's the wedding?" His response was frantic, desperate. "Mom, where are you? The guests are here. There's no food, and Tiffany is losing it." Charlotte smiled into the phone. "Oh, I'm at a beautiful spa, darling. The lake view is breathtaking. I'm having a chocolate massage right now." The line went silent for a second. Then Marcus's voice cracked. "Mom, this isn't funny. We have 150 guests and 15 kids running wild. Tiffany's crying. Please, please help us." Charlotte's voice softened, but her words were firm. "Oh, honey, didn't you read my letter? I cancelled everything when I realized I wasn't a guest at your wedding. Just the hired help you forgot to hire." On the other end, she could hear shouting, crying, the unmistakable sound of chaos unraveling. Tiffany's voice broke through, sharp and panicked. "Charlotte, you can't do this to us. You promised the buffet." Charlotte's reply was gentle but cutting. "I promised it when I thought I was invited to celebrate, not to babysit. Next time, sweetheart, ask before you assign someone a job." Then she ended the call, turned her phone to silent, and sank deeper into the spa chair as laughter and relief bubbled up from somewhere deep inside it. Back in the city, the grand wedding that was supposed to be the event of the year had descended into pure disorder. The elegant reception hall, once meant to shine with laughter, music, and the scent of roasted meats, now smelled like panic and perfume. Guests murmured in confusion, glancing toward the empty buffet tables that stood like monuments to poor planning. The band had started playing early to distract the growing unease, but even their music couldn't drown out the whispers. "Where's the food? Did the caterer cancel? Is this part of the plan?" Marcus darted between tables, his tuxedo jacket already rumpled, his forehead glistening with sweat. Tiffany was on the verge of tears. Clutching her bouquet so tightly, the flowers began to crumble. "Marcus," she hissed through gritted teeth, "call your mother again. She can't do this. This is our wedding." But every call went unanswered. He read and reread her letter, each line stinging worse than the last. Charlotte's calm handwriting, "With love, but with dignity, Mom," was more devastating than any shouted argument could have been. The woman he had always seen as unshakable had simply chosen not to show up. And in doing so, she had turned their entire day upside down. Meanwhile, in the hall's corner, a different kind of chaos was erupting. The 15 children that Tiffany had expected Charlotte to watch were now running wild like a swarm of tiny whirlwinds. One toddler had discovered the chocolate fountain and was gleefully splashing it onto the white linens. Another group had turned the dance floor into a racetrack, sliding in their socks as parents tried helplessly to wrangle them. "Who's supposed to be watching the kids?" shouted a frustrated mother, her voice rising over the music. "They told us there'd be supervision." Another snapped, "This is ridiculous. I wouldn't have brought my twins if I'd known." Soon, the chatter turned to complaints. Guests began leaving, muttering about the disorganization. Tiffany's perfectly curated Pinterest wedding had turned into a live comedy of errors, one that would be remembered not for romance, but for chaos. Audrey, her sister, tried to help by handing out slices of cake, early to distract the children, but that only made things worse. Frosting smeared across dresses, a child knocked over a centerpiece, and someone accidentally unplugged the band's sound system. For the first time, Tiffany's composure cracked completely. "She ruined everything," she cried, mascara streaking her cheeks. "That old woman ruined my wedding!" While panic brewed in the reception hall, Charlotte and Loretta sat side by side in fluffy spa robes, sipping tea and watching the sun dip over the lake. The silence between them was peaceful, the kind that only comes after years of shared friendship and hard-earned wisdom. "Do you think they've noticed you're gone yet?" Loretta asked, with a teasing smile. Charlotte chuckled softly. "Oh, I'd say they noticed around breakfast." She picked up her phone, now blinking with dozens of missed calls. Messages from Marcus flooded her screen. Short, desperate bursts. "Mom, please. We need you. The caterers are gone. Guests are hungry. Tiffany's crying. There are kids everywhere." She scrolled through them slowly, her lips curving into a small, knowing smile. "Funny," she murmured. "They never texted this much when they thought I was cooking for free." With a calm that only years of patience could earn, she called Marcus back. He answered before the first ring had even finished. "Mom, please! The guests are furious. The kids are screaming. Tiffany, she's losing it. We'll pay you. Just come." Charlotte sipped her tea. "Pay me? Oh, darling, I'm flattered. But I'm not for hire. You might want to call a professional nanny. They charge about $10 an hour per child. Shouldn't be more than $900 for the evening. Cheap, compared to the $3,000 I spent on your buffet." On the other end, silence. Then a quiet, broken, "You heard us, didn't you?" Charlotte's tone softened. Every word, son. The laughter. The plans. The part where I wouldn't even realize you were using me. It was enlightening. The sound of Marcus's voice, trembling on the phone, brought no pleasure to her. Only a bittersweet ache. "Mom, please don't do this. You've always been there for me." Charlotte sighed, gazing out at the pink-streaked sky. "Exactly, Marcus. Always. And that's the problem. You stopped seeing it as kindness and started seeing it as obligation. I love you, but I won't let you mistake my love for servitude." In the background, she could hear Tiffany's frantic sobs. "Charlotte, we'll pay double, triple. Just please come." Charlotte's response was calm and resolute. "Sweetheart, this isn't about money. It's about respect. You thought I was your free help, a convenient old woman you could keep busy while you played host. But I'm not the help, Tiffany. I'm family, and you don't treat family that way." She ended the call, gently, silencing her phone once more. Loretta looked at her with wide, admiring eyes. "You know, Char, that might be the most graceful rebellion I've ever witnessed." Charlotte smiled faintly. Sometimes the loudest lesson is the one taught in silence. As twilight wrapped around the spa, and laughter from other guests filled the air, Charlotte finally let herself exhale. For the first time in years, she wasn't needed, and it felt wonderful. As evening settled over the lake, Charlotte and Loretta found themselves sitting in the spa's outdoor lounge, wrapped in white robes, watching the sky turn shades of violet and gold. The chaos of the wedding was miles away, both in distance and in spirit. The world around them was serene, waves lapping gently against the shore, the faint hum of cicadas, the soft clinking of wine glasses. Charlotte had expected to feel guilt by now. She thought maybe, after years of mothering and sacrificing, walking away from her son's wedding would leave a hole in her heart. But instead, she felt peace. A strange, liberating peace that came from finally honoring her own worth. Loretta glanced at her and smiled. "You look lighter," she said, "like someone took 100 pounds off your shoulders." Charlotte chuckled softly. That's what happens when you stop carrying everyone else's happiness on your back. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, until Charlotte's phone buzzed again. Not with panic this time, but with a quiet, hesitant message. "I'm sorry, Mom. It was from Marcus. Just 2 words. But they were the beginning of something." Later that night, Marcus finally called again. His voice was softer this time. Humbled, fragile, full of regret. "Mom, you were right," he said. "I didn't see it. I thought you were just happy to help, like always. I didn't realize how much we were taking from you." Charlotte's tone remained calm, but her heart ached at the vulnerability in his voice. "Marcus, I would have done anything for you," she said. "You know that. But love isn't meant to be one-sided. It's not about how much one person can give before they break." On the other end of the line, Marcus took a shaky breath. "Tiffany's devastated. The guests were furious. We had to order last-minute pizza deliveries. The pictures are a disaster. But I think we needed this. Charlotte smiled faintly. Sometimes lessons come dressed as disasters. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I didn't do this to embarrass you, Marcus. I did it so you'd remember that I'm not just your mother. I'm a person, with feelings, with limits. And I won't spend the rest of my life being invisible. There was silence, followed by the soft sound of her son crying. The kind of cry that comes when pride finally breaks. I understand now, he whispered. I really do. For the first time in years, Charlotte felt heard. Not pitied, not placated. Heard. It was a small moment, but monumental in its weight. She could picture her son, sitting in the empty hall after the guests had gone, jacket off, his head in his hands. Realizing the full scope of what had happened, she imagined Tiffany beside him. No longer furious, just exhausted and ashamed. It wasn't revenge Charlotte wanted. It was recognition. And perhaps now, they finally understood what her quiet strength had always meant. As she ended the call and placed her phone aside, Loretta handed her another glass of wine. You know, Loretta said softly, I think you just taught them more in one day than you did in 30 years. Charlotte smiled, her eyes glimmering with tired affection. Maybe. But it wasn't just for them. It was for me too. She took a slow sip, letting the wine warm her chest. For the first time in my life, I didn't fix something that wasn't mine to fix. I didn't rush in to save the day. I let them learn. The next morning, the sun rose over the lake, casting ripples of gold across the water. Charlotte stood by the balcony in her robe, sipping her tea and feeling an almost childlike joy. She thought of her late husband, wondering what he would have said about all this. Probably something wise and simple, like, about time you took a break, Char. She smiled at the thought. Behind her, Loretta began packing, humming softly. So, what now? She asked. Charlotte turned to her, her face glowing in the morning light. Now, she said. Now I go home. I'll talk to Marcus and Tiffany. Not with anger, but with honesty. We'll set boundaries, real ones. And then I'll live my life. Maybe join that senior book club. Or finally take those painting classes. Loretta laughed. Look at you. A rebel in pearls. Charlotte grinned. No, Lo, just a woman who finally remembered that love without respect isn't love at all. And as she stood there, breathing in the crisp morning air, Charlotte realized that this calm, this clarity, was the real happy ending she'd been searching for all along. When Charlotte returned home the next afternoon, the quiet hum of her little house greeted her like an old friend. The scent of lavender still lingered from the candle she'd left burning. The kitchen spotless and still. A sharp contrast to the chaos she imagined had unfolded at the wedding. She placed her bag on the counter, poured herself a cup of tea, and sat down at the same table where just a week earlier she had planned her son's entire celebration. The silence was thick with reflection, but it wasn't heavy anymore. For the first time in years, Charlotte wasn't measuring her worth by what she'd done for others. She had drawn a line, and she had kept it. That thought filled her with both pride and a strange, tender sadness. Because even when you're right, even when you stand up for yourself, a mother's heart still aches for her child. She looked at the framed photo of Marcus on the counter. His bright smile frozen in time. You'll understand one day, she whispered softly. Maybe you already do. Outside, the wind rustled through the garden, carrying the faint scent of roses, the same kind she had planned to use as centerpieces. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, letting the bittersweetness wash over her. By evening, there was a knock at the door. Hesitant, familiar. When Charlotte opened it, Marcus stood there, looking older than he had 3 days ago. His tie was gone, his shirt wrinkled, his expression a mixture of guilt and humility. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he exhaled, almost a whisper. "Mom." Just that one word. Heavy with regret, apology, and love. Charlotte stepped aside without a word, motioning him in. He looked around the kitchen, his eyes falling on the empty counters. "So it's true," he murmured. "You cancelled everything." She nodded. "Every last tray." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Tiffany cried all night. I wanted to be angry at you, but—" His voice faltered. "I couldn't, because I realized you were right. We took advantage of you." Charlotte said nothing, letting the silence speak for her. Finally he continued. "It wasn't just Tiffany. I should have seen it. You've always done everything. For me, for everyone. And I just expected it." His voice cracked. "I'm sorry, Mom." Charlotte's heart softened. She reached out, resting her hand over his. "Marcus," she said gently. "Love makes us blind sometimes. But what matters is whether we open our eyes when life forces us to." They sat together for hours, talking like they hadn't in years. Marcus told her everything. How the guests had whispered. How Tiffany had broken down in embarrassment. How the evening had ended with them serving takeout boxes on fine china. It sounded almost comical, but Charlotte could tell the lesson had sunk in deeper than words could describe. "Tiffany's been crying since we got home," Marcus said. "She wants to come over and apologize." Charlotte hesitated, sipping her tea. "I'll speak to her," she said softly. "But not today. I need time. Forgiveness isn't something you rush." She looked at her son with a mix of sadness and wisdom. "You chose a woman you love, and that's beautiful. But make sure she learns how to love your family too, not just tolerate us." Marcus nodded, eyes downcast. "She will. I'll make sure of it." Then he looked up, his eyes wet. "You really taught us something, Mom." Charlotte smiled faintly. "That's what mothers do, even when we wish we didn't have to." That night, after Marcus left, Charlotte sat by the window with her journal, reflecting on everything that had happened. She thought about how life had a strange way of delivering lessons. Not through grand gestures, but through moments of stillness and pain. Sometimes she realized, standing up for yourself doesn't look like a battle. It looks like peace. It looks like silence. It looks like the courage to walk away, even when your heart wants to stay. As she wrote, her words flowed easily, unfiltered and raw. Respect is not given freely. It's taught, one boundary at a time. She closed the journal and looked out at the moon, her reflection faint in the glass. Somewhere deep down, she hoped Tiffany would truly understand what that lesson meant. Not just for Charlotte, but for herself. Because every woman, sooner or later, faces a moment when she must decide whether to be quiet for comfort or to speak for dignity. Charlotte had made her choice, and though it cost her a perfect wedding day, it gave her something far more lasting: peace. A week after Marcus's visit, Tiffany showed up at Charlotte's doorstep. No text, no call, just a quiet knock on a Wednesday morning. When Charlotte opened the door, she found the young woman standing there, her eyes red from crying, her makeup bare. A far cry from the flawless bride who had once carried herself with arrogance. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Tiffany said softly, "I know I'm the last person you want to see." Charlotte's tone was calm, but not cold. "That depends on which Tiffany I'm talking to," she said. "The one who mocked me behind my back, or the one who's ready to face what she did?" Tiffany swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "The second one," she whispered. "The one who's ashamed." Charlotte stepped aside, motioning her in. They sat at the same kitchen table, where so much had begun. This time, without pretense. Tiffany stared at her hands. I don't know why I said those things. I thought I was being funny. I thought I was being clever." Her voice broke. "But I was cruel and stupid. You didn't deserve that." Charlotte listened in silence. When Tiffany finally looked up, tears streaming down her cheeks, she saw not anger in Charlotte's eyes, but disappointment, a far heavier thing to bear. "You hurt me," Charlotte said gently, not because of the words, but because of the intention behind them. "You saw me as a tool, someone who existed to make your day easier. But a family isn't built on convenience, Tiffany. It's built on respect." Tiffany nodded through her tears. "I know that now. I really do. When everything fell apart that day, I realized how much you'd been holding us together. I kept thinking, if you were there, it all would have worked. And that made me feel even worse, because the person I insulted was the one who could have saved us." Her voice cracked again. "I don't know how to make it right." Charlotte's face softened, the sharp edges of hurt beginning to dull. "You start by meaning what you just said," she replied. "And then you show it, not in words, but in action. Respect isn't spoken, it's lived." Tiffany nodded, wiping her eyes. "I will, I promise." Then, in a gesture that caught Charlotte completely off guard, Tiffany reached out and took her hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for teaching me the hard way. I'll never forget it." Charlotte squeezed her hand gently. "Good, because real lessons never come easy." Over the next few weeks, something began to shift in their family dynamic. Tiffany started visiting Charlotte, not out of obligation, but out of genuine affection. They cooked together, shared recipes, and sometimes just talked over coffee without the tension that once filled the air. Marcus, true to his word, worked to rebuild the bridge between his mother and his wife, one conversation at a time. He helped Charlotte around the house more often, invited her to family dinners, and for the first time, insisted that she come as a guest, not as the one setting the table. Slowly, the wounds began to heal. One afternoon, Tiffany brought over an envelope, a check for $3,000. "It's not payment," she said quickly, when Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "It's restitution. You spent that much on the wedding buffet before we ever said thank you. I can't erase what I said, but I can return what you lost." Charlotte smiled, pushing the envelope back toward her. "I don't need your money, sweetheart. I just needed your respect." Tiffany hesitated, then smiled back, tears glimmering again. "Then I'll make sure you always have it." And in that moment, Charlotte finally believed her. With time, what began as humiliation became transformation. Charlotte didn't just reclaim her dignity. She reshaped her life around it. She joined a local women's circle that focused on community empowerment, teaching others about boundaries and self-worth. Her story, the wedding that fell apart, quietly spread through town, turning into a symbol of strength for those who'd spent too long saying yes when they wanted to say no. She became a mentor of sorts, the woman who reminded others that age didn't make you invisible, it made you wise. At home, her relationship with Marcus flourished anew, grounded not in guilt, but in mutual understanding. And Tiffany, for all her early missteps, began treating Charlotte not as an obligation, but as a friend. The first time Tiffany called her mom, without hesitation or irony, Charlotte felt tears sting her eyes, because forgiveness wasn't about forgetting what happened. It was about acknowledging it, learning from it, and choosing to love anyway. And as she stood in her garden one morning, pruning her roses beneath the soft spring sun, Charlotte realized that her boundaries hadn't distanced her from her family at all. They'd brought them closer, stronger, more honest, and finally whole. A year passed faster than Charlotte could have imagined. Seasons rolled by like soft pages in a book. each one carrying new peace into her life. Her mornings now began with sunlight filtering through lace curtains, a cup of tea, and the gentle sound of birds in her garden. There was no rush, no lists, no endless errands to run for someone else's happiness, just calm. For the first time in decades, Charlotte was living her life for herself, and the world around her seemed to notice. The women at her church often asked her how she managed to stay so joyful and poised after everything that happened. She always smiled and said the same thing. You find peace the day you stop apologizing for having boundaries. It became her quiet mantra, one that would soon reach far beyond her small town. One afternoon, over coffee with Loretta, an idea was born. You should write about this, Shah, Loretta said. About what happened, what you learned. I bet there are thousands of women who need to hear it. Charlotte hesitated at first. Oh, I'm no writer. But Loretta laughed. You're a storyteller, sweetheart, and that's better. So, Charlotte began to write. Not as revenge, but as reflection. Her little notebook turned into chapters, and those chapters turned into a manuscript. One she titled, With Love, but with Dignity. She wrote about motherhood, aging, sacrifice, and rediscovery, about how easily kindness could be mistaken for weakness, and how strength sometimes looked like walking away. The writing process became her therapy. Each page was a confession, a revelation, and a love letter to every woman who had ever been told she was too nice or too helpful. When she finally finished, Loretta helped her send the manuscript to a small local publisher. To Charlotte's astonishment, the story caught fire. Readers connected with her honesty, her humor, her quiet rebellion. What began as a letter to her son became a message to the world, a reminder that self-respect isn't selfish, it's survival. Within months, the book was being discussed at book clubs and women's groups across the state. Journalists even came to her little cottage for interviews, their cameras capturing the warmth in her eyes and the pride in her voice. I never meant to start a movement, she said once, smiling. I just meant to tell the truth. When the first anniversary of Marcus and Tiffany's wedding arrived, Charlotte received an invitation, handwritten by Tiffany herself. It was for a small, intimate gathering at their home. Nothing grand or extravagant, just family and close friends. The note read, We'd love for you to come as our guest of honor. Charlotte smiled when she read it. A year ago, those words would have sounded hollow. Now they were genuine. When she arrived that evening, the house glowed with warmth. Tiffany greeted her at the door with a tight hug, her eyes glistening. We've been waiting for you, Mom, she said softly. Marcus appeared beside her, holding a bouquet of roses, the same kind Charlotte used to grow in her garden. For you, he said, handing them over. A small thank you for teaching us what respect really means. As dinner began, Charlotte sat at the center of the table, surrounded by laughter, stories, and the sound of children playing nearby. Watched by a professional babysitter, of course. For the first time, she felt truly part of the celebration, not because she'd worked for it, but because she'd earned her place there through honesty and courage. As the evening drew to a close, Marcus stood and raised a glass. To my mother, he said, his voice thick with emotion. The strongest woman I know, you taught us that love without respect isn't love at all, and that sometimes the hardest lessons come wrapped in grace. The guests clinked their glasses, and Charlotte felt tears rise to her eyes. She looked around the room, at her son, his wife, the laughter of their friends, and realized something profound. She hadn't just restored her family's respect. She had rewritten what it meant to be valued. Later that night, as she returned home, she paused on her porch, the moonlight painting soft silver across her garden. The roses swayed gently in the breeze. Full and fragrant, she smiled to herself and whispered, "We did it, didn't we?" And in that stillness, in the quiet glow of her reclaimed peace, Charlotte knew her story was more than a tale of defiance. It was a testament to every woman who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, or used, yet still chose dignity over despair, because in the end, respect isn't demanded, it's earned. And once you reclaim it, you never lose it again.